Being able to trade down within tiers at positions while still maintaining production is by far the easiest way to add draft capital or just more assets in general to your dynasty roster, and that is the point of this series throughout this entire 2024 offseason. The way this is going to work is I'm going to show you guys stats from two similar players, but one is valued at a premium in startup drafts or in trades, and the other is valued as more of like the generic version of that player, and then we're going to break it all down. So first up, we have a quarterback comparison, and our premium quarterback is currently 26 years old, and in 13 games played last year, averaged per game 35.1 pass attempts, 240 passing yards, 1.5 passing touchdowns, 3.1 fantasy points per game just from rushing in total, 17.9 fantasy points per game overall, with 11 top 24 weeks and 7 top 12 weeks. Our generic quarterback is also 26 years old, and in 16 games played last year, averaged per game 35.2 pass attempts, 250 passing yards, 1.3 touchdowns, 3.6 fantasy points from rushing, 16.7 fantasy points per game total, with 13 top 24 weeks and 8 top 12 weeks. And to further feed the comparison between the two, both quarterbacks are former top 10 picks over the last 5 years. They both currently play in the AFC, and both quarterbacks also lost their number one receiver from last year this offseason. Now, those hints might have given it away, but our premium quarterback is Justin Herbert, currently valued as the QB8 in May ADP, and our generic quarterback is Trevor Lawrence, currently valued as QB14 in ADP, about a round and a half later in value. So why the discrepancy here? Well, one of these quarterbacks have posted multiple elite fantasy seasons in his short career, and the other has not, despite massive expectations coming out of college. But things have changed in both of their situations that make this comparison a lot easier to make, and honestly, I believe the value difference between the two is way too large right now, and they should both be valued nearly identically. Now, I have adamantly been against Justin Herbert for a couple of months now, basically since the signings of Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, but since then, things have just continued to get worse. They trade away Keenan Allen, they cut Mike Williams, they let Austin Eckler and Gerald Everett walk in free agency, and instead of drafting Malik Neighbors 5th overall, they draft an offensive lineman and then wait until the second round to draft Ladd McConkey, another wide receiver that I have adamantly been against all draft season. I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely terrified I am for Justin Herbert's fantasy production this year that I just want nothing to do with him at all for 2024. And if you want some numbers to back all of this up, here are the comparisons between Harbaugh's passing production when he was last in the NFL compared to Herbert's passing production since joining the Chargers in 2020. And as you can see, they are the complete opposite basically, because Harbaugh's offenses are way more run heavy than any offenses that Herbert has had while being in LA. He's no longer going to live in that 40 pass attempt per game range that he's been in, but rather closer to probably 30 to 33, maybe 35 at the absolute most pass attempts per game. And even if we assume his efficiency stays, any drop in volume is going to result in a drop of overall production to just being like Baker Mayfield or Matthew Stafford or Trevor Lawrence. See, for 2 years now, Trevor Lawrence has broken 4,000 passing yards and had 20 to 25 passing touchdowns, plus another couple hundred yards and a handful of touchdowns on the ground. From a statistical standpoint, he has actually been really, really good. It just hasn't been up to par with our expectations for him coming out of Clemson. But I think some of that disappointment is seeping into his dynasty value and putting him outside the QB1 range for dynasty. We have seen flashes and stretches of games where if Lawrence puts it all together, he could have a tremendous season. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that there is a 2-minute video on Twitter of Trevor Lawrence near missed touchdowns from 2023. There are 15 total clips in here of potential touchdowns that Lawrence could have had last year, that even just like 5 of these would have made Lawrence a top 8 fantasy quarterback last year, let alone if he connected on half of these or even more. And I think the kind of hilarious part of this montage too is that the vast majority of these near missed touchdowns are to Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones, who are both no longer on the Jacksonville Jaguars for 2024. So I'm not worried at all about Trevor Lawrence losing either of those guys in the offseason. They still have Christian Kirk, they still have Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne out of the backfield, all very stable and experienced players. I think the addition of Brian Thomas Jr. is very underrated, even as a first-round pick. BTJ is going to open up so much for this offense in terms of being a downfield threat that they really haven't had since Lawrence has been there. And you can't talk about downfield threats without mentioning Gabe Davis too, who, probably isn't as great of a wide receiver as everybody wanted him to be, but he's going to help in this offense, and he's going to help Trevor Lawrence. So all of a sudden, this Jaguars team has speed, versatility, and a great combination of high upside youth and very stable experience, and I cannot wait to watch Trevor Lawrence with all these weapons around him in 2024. According to our DLF trade analyzer, the difference between the two right now is around the 111 in Superflex leagues, which actually puts you in a guaranteed position to get any of Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., or Jonathan Brooks, which are just massive additions to your roster at what I believe to be a very minimal, if any, true effect on your production at the quarterback position. If you can't get a late first this year, you could even try for a 2025 or even 2026 first, just to add value that way with a future first round pick. If you want to look at a veteran player to help you compete this year, that could come in the form of James Cook, Josh Jacobs, or Derrick Henry at the running back position, Amari Cooper, Cooper Kupp, or Mike Evans at the wide receiver position. And if you're rebuilding and you want some more youth, you could try Jaden Reed or maybe take a shot on Rashee Rice, getting through all this legal stuff relatively unscathed. But the point here that I'm trying to make is move quickly, because I don't want more people catching on to Justin Herbert's potential struggles this year when redraft season gets here and people start actually digging into projections and everything. Make this move now while there's still value to be gained moving from Justin Herbert down to Trevor Lawrence. Next up, we have a running back comparison, and our premium running back is currently 23 years old, and in 15 games played last year, averaged per game 14.6 rush attempts, 2.5 targets, 77.5 total yards, 0.6 total touchdowns, 13.3 fantasy points per game, with 8 top 24 weeks and 4 top 12 weeks. Our generic running back is currently 27 years old, and in 17 games played last year, averaged per game 14.8 rush attempts, 3.9 targets, 77.5 total yards, 0.4 total touchdowns, 13.1 fantasy points per game, with 9 top 24 weeks and 6 top 12 weeks. Now, I don't really have any additional comparisons for these two players like I did for the quarterbacks, so I'm just going to give you guys like 3 seconds to lock in a guess on who each player is. And all right, our premium running back is Kenneth Walker, currently valued as the RB11 in May ADP. And our generic running back is Tony Pollard, currently valued as the RB24 over 4 rounds later in ADP. So why the discrepancy here? Well, this one is pretty easy. There is a massive 4-year age difference between the two, which in running back years is basically the equivalent of Steve Buscemi trying to blend in with high school teenagers.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
But if we just ignore the age difference for right now, basically everything else for these two running backs is nearly identical. And actually, since Walker joined the league in 2022, Pollard has outproduced him on a season-long level in both years, finishing as the RB8 and RB14, compared to Walker at RB18 and RB19. On a points per game level, Pollard outscored Walker in 2022 by over 2 fantasy points per game, and in 2023, the difference was 0.2 of a point between them. So really, Walker has not earned the right to be a top 12 dynasty running back based on production, just like how Pollard has outperformed his ADP of RB24 in back-to-back seasons. So the key argument here is, what do you believe about Tony Pollard now that he's on the Tennessee Titans and not the Dallas Cowboys? Does he still maintain enough volume to match Kenneth Walker, especially with the 4-year age difference? And in my opinion, yes, I think he does, and there are several reasons I'm confident that he is the RB1 in Tennessee. Number 1, money. Just from a pure contract standpoint, a 3-year, $24 million contract is not insignificant, and at face value, I believe that contract signifies that Pollard gets the first crack at the RB1 role over Tyjae Spears, because remember, this coaching staff did not draft Tyjae Spears last year, but their first course of action in free agency this year was to sign Tony Pollard. So if we just follow the money here a little bit, all signs point towards Pollard at least getting the first crack at the RB1 job. The second reason here is offensive systems from the new coaching staff. The Titans have hired Brian Callahan from Cincinnati, and if we assume that he's going to be bringing over his offensive system to Tennessee, then that should be good for the RB1, because Joe Mixon was a workhorse running back all 5 years with Callahan and a top 10 fantasy running back in points per game 4 years in a row from 2020 to 2023. Even at the end of last year, when Chase Brown started to become a thing and was averaging 8 to 12 touches per game over the final 6 weeks, Mixon was still averaging 19 touches per game, ranging from 13 to 25 weekly, which is still a tremendous amount of work, over 320 touches over a 17-game pace. We can even go one step further and look at new offensive coordinator Nick Holtz's offense, where he was the passing game coordinator for the Jaguars last year, an offense that just gave Travis Etienne 325 touches as the bell cow in that offense. And even in 2022, when Holtz was the offensive coordinator at UNLV, it wasn't a great offense, but their RB1 saw 232 touches for over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns in just 11 games played, while their RB2 only saw 90 total touches. So that RB1 was effectively the 70% of a 70-30 split as a workhorse running back. So based on all of that, I do believe that Pollard is the RB1 in Tennessee, and while it may not be a complete bell cow like he was in Dallas last year, a 60% split of 400 touches to the running back position is still 240 total touches, which is what Isaiah Pacheco had last year. James Conner had that last year. David Montgomery. All three of those running backs were top 20 backs in fantasy at and around 240 touches. Plus, maybe a drop in overall volume might actually be a good thing for Tony Pollard. He might just be one of those backs who can't be a 3-down guy, but are more efficient on lower volume. Alvin Kamara is a fantastic example of this. Aaron Jones to an extent as well. Jahmyr Gibbs might be like that too. Or remember however long ago, Lamar Miller was like the definition of efficiency over volume at the running back position. That could just be what Tony Pollard is, and if we can get him back to his 2022 form, sharing the backfield with someone else to keep him fresh, that might not actually be a bad thing. According to our analyzer, the difference between Walker and Pollard is an early second-round pick in Superflex leagues, anywhere from like the 201 to the 2.04, which in this class is a solid dice roll on your favorite day 2 rookie wide receiver, or maybe a guy like Bo Nix or Trey Benson as well. In one quarterback leagues, that translates to roughly the 111 or 112 as the difference between the two, so it's basically the same group of rookies to gamble on too. If you want to look at veterans instead of rookies, I'd imagine if you're acquiring a 27-year-old running back that you are a contender this year, so you could look at players like Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, or Ramondre Stevenson. Or if you need a starting tight end, that could maybe be David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, or Evan Ingram. Or you could try to add to your quarterback room in Superflex leagues and try out a guy like Will Levis, Russell Wilson, or Daniel Jones as a streamable option every week for your quarterback 2 slot. All of these trades are potentially possible in your leagues if you're willing to lose some age at the running back position, but you can still maintain production, and you're getting a very solid asset on top to either improve the longevity of your roster or improve your odds of competing in 2024.